Since it's our introduction, we'll talk a lot about a bit of an origin story, if that makes sense. Everyone always loves an origin story, depending on how far back you go. This is a room of practitioners, I understand. We had a good little brief introduction. We had some good conversations, good starting points out in the hallway and everything. So I'm looking forward to getting into those. But the origin story of Mezmo, and actually for me personally in the observability space, I've been in that space for a long time. Mostly growing up through consulting and sales organizations. But over the course of the last 4 years, I now can consider myself somewhat of a practitioner myself. And part of why I say that is Mezmo, which was formerly known as LogDNA, has been in the observability space since 2015. So if you look back on our origin story, we were a log management company. And that presents a lot of interesting challenges. So some of the things that we struggled with, or I struggled with trying to run a company to provide a affordable value-added service to our customers, was some of the same things that you might have struggled with as practitioners, like thinking about the cost of this telemetry data and how do you manage this telemetry data, how do you get value out of it. And so we'll talk a little bit about that journey, but we've been in this space since 2015. We index over 5 petabytes a month right now. We're actually the back-end logging provider for the entire IBM cloud. So we've been doing this at scale with a number of enterprises. And then we also have our own business outside of the IBM business, which has over 11,000 monthly active users. And we actually have about 70 kind of enterprise type customers as well, like contract customers, we consider them. So we've been, over the course of the last 4 or 5 years, really been working with a lot of enterprises and kind of, to be honest, struggling alongside them. Because of this log management problem, which is a hugely important part of observability and a hugely important part of cybersecurity, is something that people struggle with, again, as I mentioned, from a cost standpoint. So we've been running alongside them, trying to keep up with storage cost and find cheaper and higher value solutions and make it so they can get the data better. And we actually came to a point where we felt like there's a better way. That this industry needs to evolve more, and that there was a new opportunity to help our customers kind of solve this value and cost problem. And one of our kind of foundational premises, which I heard is a word that you all like, the foundation stuff. To get it, check. Don't say on-prem, say on-premises, foundational premise. Got it. I'm on my way. Am I early brownie points? One of our foundational tenets, though, is that we believe customers need to take control of their data. Like, they need to own their telemetry data. You can't outsource this or just give that control to the security providers and to the observability providers. And so that dynamic needs to change. And if you think about the way the world was, you had this dedicated agent, pipeline, ingestion, storage, and analysis capability that was on a vendor by vendor basis. And in the studies that we've done, like, the average enterprise has over 6 observability tools. So think about the tax an organization is taking, and think about what control they give up by operating in that environment. So we see the wave of the future as much more kind of open standards friendly, OTel friendly, open data lakes, and thinking more about controlling your data and things like that. But we'll get into that in a minute. But really, like, some examples, like we would see a customer, for example, a developer would change a line of code, and that line of code would generate a $45,000 monthly overage bill. And this is someone who was not spending $45,000 a year to begin with. And so think about that impact. And then they come to us and they're upset with that. I get it, rightfully so. And so they're upset, but like we also incur a huge cost for that too. So like when I say we've struggled alongside them, it's like in a lot of cases we'd forgive those, but now we're eating the cost of doing that. And that's because there's this incredibly dynamic environment around telemetry data that is not well understood today. So that's kind of where we started from. Again, we had a lot of experience in the space, but I'll kind of I'll start to transition us into where we're going to in the recent years. So see if there's any questions or clarifications on that. No? Good? Okay, great, we'll keep going. Okay, so when we think about this, one of the really early learnings is like a lot of what we do goes back to this graph on the right-hand side. And that graph is basically calling out that the cost of this telemetry data is increasing, but the value is not increasing at the same rate. And that's just like a fundamental problem that has to be solved. Whether it's solved in the way that we're positioning or the way that we think it should be solved or somewhere else, it has to be solved. The problem just has to be solved because it's an untenable problem for both the cybersecurity as well as the observability industries. And so we see this incredible increase in data, and we see that telemetry data is incredibly unique in its nature too. It's not the same as general data. It grows, it's spiky. The context in which you care about the data changes. You may not care about all this data, and then you have a security breach, and now you care a lot about the data, right? So it might not be worth saving in like a business as usual mode, but the minute you need to get access to it, it matters more than anything else. Or if you're in an incident mode where the performance of the system isn't working, you start to change your context often in this. And so we believe the systems have to account for that. We also have more and more consumers of this data too. We have more people. We have cybersecurity people trying to consume it. We have observability. And increasingly, people are looking at what contribution this has to AI and large language models and things like that, although it's early. And I'm definitely not over-rotating on the AI message. I'm just saying it's a thing. And so we see a lot more consumers of this data too. And so we think that this data needs to be treated uniquely from just more general purpose data as well. So when we think about our focus, the things that we were really focused on as a company, as we think about this transition from a log management provider to a telemetry pipeline provider and helping people take control of their data, we think of three. These are really our product principles, and I'll talk a little bit later about how we engage with customers to help them on their journey and what challenges they face. But our focus is to tackle the unique problems of telemetry data, some of which I just described. We'll do that by applying data engineering best practices. So a lot of those best practices in the data ops space have been, essentially solved for, but not for this type of data. And so that we will apply those capabilities to this type of data. And then finally, there is a very specific workflow that whether it's the SRE or the platform engineer that the operators, the actual practitioners use, especially in when they're taking on DevOps type methodologies, that will tailor the workflows to that. So the way you apply data engineering best practices needs to be adapted for the user because they are overloaded. It needs to be easy. It needs to fit in their form. They want things like pipelines as code and things like that that are really important to how they operate. So, okay, keep rolling. Great. Yeah.
On the data types, because we talk about observability data or log data. What are the sources, structured versus unstructured, and because as we try to enrich data, the biggest problem that every solution says we're going to enrich your data with additional intelligence.
Yeah.
But what happens when it gets really hard to sift through it, right? The volume will affect performance, and ultimately there's a lot of human stuff, right? So an application goes down 17 times a week. Keith knows why it goes down, and so he writes in his little logbook, this is why it went down. And we don't necessarily feed it back into the system. So I just want to see sort of what type of data you're pulling in, and then what type of data we can add to help enrich that knowledge.
Yeah. So that's a lot, but it's a good question. And so when we think about, there's a lot of different categories of that. There's structured and unstructured, of course. There's all like the infrastructure type logs. There's the custom application logs. There's user logs. And so when we get into the solution, I think we'll touch on that a little bit more, but like there's the ability to enrich that. But where I come back to a lot of the time is, this is a future slide, but the core problem is not understanding the data because there's so much of it and it changes so fast, right? So like by the nature of our move to cloud, we're consuming composite services or composite applications, we're consuming microservices, and therefore the ownership of the data that's flowing through is distributed, but we have these centralized teams that are trying to manage it. And so how do you filter that back through? Some of what you talked about, I might actually suggest we'd push off to an observability tool as well.
Totally. Yeah.
Like so we're not trying to solve for the we refer to a lot of times internally as the charts and graphs and the analysis. It's really about the data management of it. But there is certainly a lot you can do to augment that, to compress that data. And I think we'll touch on it, but we can come back to it if not. Yeah, good question though. Okay, so we've introduced, we brought our telemetry pipeline to market in May of this year. So we're early in the journey in a sense. We've been operating a pipeline for over 6 or 7 years now for our own purposes, but we've now created one. And I think you'll find a lot of what you see in the market when people talk about pipelines, it's a pipeline for the purpose of the vendor, which adds value to the customer, but it's not a pipeline for the purpose of giving the customer control of their data to help enable them to make those decisions. And so, like, for example, in terms of you asked about the sources, well, it's a very broad range. We just included some examples, but metrics, traces, events, logs, basically all the things coming in to allow customers to ingest those, transform, route, enrichment is included in that too. Have a visualization and manage it, pipelines as code, all that, and then enhance that to get to your destination to make the destination more valuable. When you think about Mezmo, don't think about they're trying to replace Datadog. They're trying to make Datadog more valuable. We're not trying to replace Splunk. We're trying to make that more valuable for you, more cost effective. And then also just acknowledging that for different purposes, different teams in an enterprise will need to consume different analysis tools, different observability tools, different cybersecurity tools, and we need to get the right information to the right places for the right consumers, rather than duplicating the information all over the place. So, yeah, so that's kind of the foundational premise of telemetry pipeline. Braxton's going to give an overview in a bit, and he'll show you exactly what it looks like and some of what we think about there.
Can we pause a second on, because
Yeah.
on this slide you have Splunk, which kind of isn't Splunk's argument that they are this tool?
Yeah, they have a. Again, another interesting conversation. Splunk has a tool to do this for the benefit of Splunk, right? It's like they're not trying to create an enterprise control point to help someone manage and own their data. They will have, like, they had DSP, which I think they bought a company called Streamlio, that would actually allow them to reduce that. There's some counterintuitive theoretical things you could get into, is like, does that serve their business model and things like that, because they're charging based on the data. Datadog's got a capability as well. Like, everyone's going to have a pipeline for the benefit of that vendor, which returns value to the customer. Our assertion, though, is that enterprises need to own that data, not just send that data to Splunk, and they want to send it to multiple different places. It's a control point that needs to be a part of the organization.
So the primary argument is that if you're like every enterprise and you don't use one tool, but you have the multiple need of, and it becomes a huge problem when I have so many data sources to send logs to.
That's right.
How do I not create a repetitive set of data streams? I have one source, that source sends to whatever, and I can subscribe to that one source to pull the data that
like, if you believe in what I consider to be the myth of a single solution, then this might not be for you. But if you believe, I believe that, like, a single solution starts to stifle innovation. That means if you're all in on everything you do as Splunk across your entire enterprise, then the only innovation you can do from a technology standpoint is pegged to the innovation of Splunk, now Cisco. And so that is going to be compromising to an enterprise's ability to adapt and deliver the services that differentiate them from their competitors. So yeah, that's a good question though. Like, again, Datadog has one. I think everyone's going to have one, but is it for the purpose of the customer, for the purpose of the vendor? Which I'm not saying that doesn't return value to the customer, but it's a little more isolated in its form. Yeah, other questions on that? Okay. Okay, so some of the top use cases. These are some of the top use cases for telemetry pipelines. People think about reducing costs, compliance, data utility. One of the ones we found is the most compelling, though, is getting deeper insights into their data, like just really understanding that data and getting insights. And what's been interesting about the pipeline space is that there's insights you can get at a point in time we really focus on the real-time nature of data. And so while there are for sure insights that you will gather through crunching through data and applying algorithms and things like that at data at rest, there are very unique insights that you can get while the data is in motion. And so that's been a very important thing. But as we get into, I'll build this out for time, but like a way to think about, no, I won't build it out like that. The way to think about how this is, and I think this is what you were touching on, there's like all these different sources that are going to contribute to getting this data to all these different locations. Today, the way it works is you have to have like an agent for each one of these. And there's a pipeline for each one of those, going to a destination for each one of those. And we can control that data. Another big use case too is actually sending data to like an S3 versus sending it to Splunk and then rehydrating that if you happen to need it in Splunk, right? So you can get the data, like in the example I use, like if you like some of the data you don't actually care about until you really care about it, we'll go put it in the cheapest storage facility you can, And then at the moment in time when you need that data, rehydrate it into the more expensive, kind of higher value storage capabilities. So that would be an example of a security use case. And then analytics and so on and so forth. But what we find though in engaging with customers here is there's one main reason why people struggle in this space right now, and it's that they don't understand the data. Like the data is not easy to understand. They're used to they have a New Relic agent which sends 1,000 metrics to a New Relic backend, and now they want to take control of it, but they don't have an understanding of that data. So we've been focusing, and what Braxton will show you is our focus on taking those data engineering best practices and applying to help people understand their data and helping them optimize that data. So when we think about engaging with our customers, the flow for us is really the first step is to understand, and then once you understand, you can optimize, and once you've optimized, you're in a better position to respond. And so there's a number of capabilities that fall under each of these. So an example of optimize would be converting logs to metrics or reducing redundant logs. But no one knows what to convert, no one knows what to drop, because that's a scary proposition. And a person can't know that information. That's why a data profiling capability is so important to giving that insights and that analysis to people around their data to go make those decisions. And then finally, yes, you may decide that I want to sample down to 20% of this data because I'm not in an incident, I'm not in a security threat environment. But when that happens, you want to rehydrate that and you want to change that sampling. You might want everything at that point because you're in a threat mode. Or you might want everything, but now you want to suppress all the error logs because you have all this other noise that's useless coming through, but it's churning up your storage and costing you. So it's both helping you make better decisions, but also reducing your costs. So that is the kind of Mezmo at a glance.
One of these slides about the sources when you have them on the left side. Yeah, this one.
Yeah.
So this is sort of kind of like a mix of push and pull, right? Source of the telemetry. So how are you addressing this? Like how you are able to mix all this data real time? I can imagine like Kubernetes is probably pull to requesting the APIs.
Is that, yeah.
No, so for the Kubernetes, our agent or something.
Okay. No worries.
Yeah. I guess I need my mic to help.
It's a good transition to you.
Yeah, perfect.
Okay, great.
Well done, thank you.
So when it comes to Kubernetes, you're talking more about pulling data from either Prometheus, where you could have a Helm chart right on there and it's pushing to us. We have open telemetry, we have our own agent. So it's a number of different sources that you can go through. With all of these, we have a couple that are pushed. We also have like pub subs, so there's messaging topics that you can listen to and bring these all into one shared space for you to then take advantage of.
gRPC, are you supporting gRPC or?
Not at this time. Maybe in the dev that I'm not quite out of. I know they're exploring a number of different topics, but we've got like Azure Event Hub and Google Pub Sub and those kind of things, and we're looking at a few others.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
The other area, I went through one of the slides really quickly, but where we see a lot of applicability too is just in data normalization. Like, so you have all these things coming in, but you want to get it into the OCSF format. You want to get it into some other format for downstream, especially in security and things like that. So we see a lot of application to more like security data normalization, getting things in the right format, getting it so it's in the format of the destination too. So formatting and building those libraries has been a big focus as well.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, well, great. I'll turn it over to Braxton. Cool. Thank you all.
I have one question regarding compliance, if I may. What I have seen from multiple customers asking when I was involved in building observability platform is help with ensuring that sensitive data is not being ingested into the different services. And since you mentioned compliance, is this kind of something that the tool also can help with, or?
Yeah. Actually, we'll just hand it to Braxton for that one. And
so when it comes to compliance, there's a number of lines. First off, we're PCI, HIPAA, SOC 2, all those kind of compliance on the back end. But it's not just about is your vendor good. It's about what is in your own data. What are you sending and pushing, right? And so we have a number of customers that are successful going in and using grok patterns, regex patterns to be able to match and flag data to say, hey, this is breaking compliance. I'm logging a credit card. I'm logging a customer information. And then scrubbing and cleaning that out before you push it onto your observability tool. I know this is Cloud Field Day, and we're going to be talking more about our SaaS product, but we do have a component of this where you can actually run these pipelines on premises, whether it's in your cloud, whether it's in your own server, and be able to process this data without pushing it out to some SIEM or to some SaaS where that data could be stored and you could breach your compliance. So you can fix it at the edge. You can also fix it in something like this, but at a scalable solution where you may have 10, 15 teams sending in data, and they might be logging customer patterns, they may be logging this PII. Being able to check it across everywhere from one little centralized point becomes very, very useful for these large-scale enterprises, so they can, rest assured, I don't have any of that data in my storage. We're not breaching our compliance.